So, I wanted to start off by asking everybody a question, and I don't want you to answer out loud,
Kevin?
but I do
Yes.
want you to answer honestly. Would you rather be alive right now or dead right now?
When you want to see that.
No, take it seriously.
Yeah. Seriously though. Just your first answer, right off the top of your head.
And in class being born.
No.
Oh.
So, with your answer, the thing of it is that tonight's message is to kind of address that thing, because the truth is that most of the world, most of the people around the world, they don't really understand a reason to live, especially in our society. Our society is one that's built on shame and guilt. All the time, every day, we open up Facebook or YouTube or any kind of news outlet, and the media, as well as our friends, ironically, unwittingly, are constantly trying to coerce us into some form of action based off of guilt or shame. Our parents do it, our families do it. Everybody does this thing where they tell you, this is what the world is like, and it's your fault. And now you have to fix it. And the funny thing about it is it's not really a functional way to do anything. People don't realize the actual effect, because it actually just kind of cuts people down and makes them incapable of being a part of this whole thing. But they still do it. So we're treated to this kind of shame all the time. You're a problem. And they don't focus on what you can fix, they focus on how you're a problem. That's what we always hear first, and that's what gets stuck there.
Don't let it distract you.
And kind of the truth is that, in the church, we do the same thing, unwittingly. The thing is that in church we're constantly telling everybody about how they're sinners, and we call ourselves sinners, and we tell everybody about their sin. We just highlight it over and over and over again. We tell everybody that they're worthless without God, useless. And even though there are truths in these statements, they're not being received the right way, Because every little kid who hears the message, you're worthless without God, they don't see value in themselves. And that's the point. In all of these situations, we don't develop value. All that we develop are reasons to be ashamed of ourselves. When I was a teenager, I was constantly told that human beings were a disease, and that we were functionally the end of all life on this planet, that we would destroy the world around us. And regardless of any science attached to that, what nobody talked about was how we fundamentally also are capable of changing that. It was only focused on the negatives. And as a result of that, that's what I carried with me. I lived in that frame of mind. And see, the thing of it is that when you spend all of your life, you go to your friends and family, and all you're met with is criticism, and you're met with shame and guilt. And then you go to church, where you're supposed to find joy, and you're met with criticism and shame and guilt. It's kind of like the world's on fire, and you don't really have any other option other than to hate yourself and want to die. Now, what's the point of living this life in this world if it's all just pain and suffering, and it's all just you being useless or worthless or a problem? There's no purpose in that. And then we have these people who are telling us that we're worthless and sinners and shameful and a problem, telling us that, then we're supposed to turn around and live for the rest of our lives because suicide's a sin, right? What do? You just have to live and suffer. That's the thing. Is that and then, as if all that wasn't enough, we start to kind of develop kind of this reactionary scenario, especially in the church. I would argue that most of the way the church is built, most of the problem behavior that we see in the church about people trying to earn their salvation is actually derivative of this particular topic. I've talked before in this group about the fear of death being the major driving force. And the thing of it is that we, in a similar vein here, almost by proxy, we live in this world, and as a result of just where we see ourselves, we try to be good. We try to make ourselves valuable to God. So we commit to a life of following all the rules. We'll look at the books of the law, and we'll read the Beatitudes as though they're supposed to be like a secondary 10 commandments given by Jesus. We look at all the fruit of the Holy Spirit as talked about in Galatians by Paul, and we use it as a diagram, as a sort of checklist to dictate our value, our goodness. If you're living without joy, then you're not being a good follower of Jesus. Well, crap, I have to be more joyful now. So we try to take the reins and control our person and who we are in order to try to look good for God. And the funny thing about that is that doesn't stop at nominal Christians. Even the most spirit-filled Bethelites that I've met do the same thing. It's just different verbiage. It's, I give myself over to Him. I'm surrendering this much to God in order for Him to take this away. I'm praying this much to God in order for Him to guide me, to show me. When you remove the things, it's still an action on our behalf with the expectation of a transaction that entitles us to some move of God. We don't see it that way because we live in a society that's so accustomed to transactions that that's the normal way that things work. If I give Josh a compliment, I expect that he will give me a compliment back. It's the way our society works. If you smile at somebody, they smile back. How many times have you, when you were at your most down, forced a smile at somebody just because they smiled at you, even though you had no desire whatsoever to smile?
Or at work.
Of course at work. Work is the best place because they actually force you to smile.
Better be serious though all the time though. But they ought to be serious all the time when they go to work though. Am I wrong or am I right? Maybe I'm wrong.
So the thing of it is this, is that we find ourselves forced into all these different scenarios, and as a result of this kind of like lifestyle that we live in, it's just empty. And what's more is it's frustrating because in our minds we're thinking that, oh, if I give myself to God this much, He's supposed to respond. And sometimes God doesn't respond. Sometimes it's a no to something that we really, really want, and we are honestly really bad at receiving no as an answer when we're asking for things that we want really bad. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, like, I've had people show up saying, hey, Nathan, can you pray for this thing? and I pray for it, and God tells me the answer, and the answer is no, and they're just like, and then the next thing I hear is that they're going to somebody else who hears from the Lord, and they're asking that person to pray on their behalf because they desperately want the answer to be anything but no. Or at other times, God just doesn't answer at all. Sometimes He's already given you an answer, and it's just a matter of living in that. And sometimes He's not going to be transactional with you because He's already talked to you. He's already told you what He's going to do. The problem now is that you don't feel that that's okay. You don't feel comfortable with what He already told you He was going to do. You might have even forgotten it because of just the raw chaos of emotions that you're going through and just the pain that you feel. And to kind of dispel anything else, there's a scale here. And it can be a small pain or it can be enormous pain that somebody is going through, where their whole world has been torn apart because every dynamic of it has just been shredded. They're in Job territory as opposed to girl who lost her cell phone territory. But regardless of where you fall on that scale, it's still a lot of escalated emotions, and as a result of that, you don't feel okay, you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel like you can hope in anything, especially as time passes and that pain remains and lingers, especially as you're left to suffer. It gets harder and harder and harder, and you go longer and longer, and you find yourself feeling more and more hopeless, even though God might have already given you your answers, or he might have just told you something about your future that could be a beacon for you to send your ship to follow through the fog, but you can't really trust that, can you? I mean, what if that's not true? Or what if it's changed somehow? Or what if it's just, you're just tired and you don't want to wait for it anymore?
Yep, that's being tired.
No. The thing is that in all of this, it comes down to a lot of us versus God and how we see things and experience things versus how He does. And this isn't to say that God doesn't understand you. I mean, Jesus went through everything that we go through, and then more. He suffered tremendously throughout His life. And the thing of it is that where we find ourselves in such a desperate situation is that sometimes there's real agony that we're going through, because there's real stuff that's happened, like a Job situation where you're in so much pain because of things that have gone so wrong. And it doesn't matter what society or culture you're in. When your children die and your friends abandon you and everything that you know and love is just taken from you, and it seems unfair, and maybe it is unfair, and suddenly you have to rebuild everything, but you don't want to rebuild everything because you shouldn't have lost what you had to begin with. You don't see why or understand why, and it's garbage. Or maybe your situation is just one where you've run out of time, or you're tired, or you're afraid. On the way here, Heather and I were reading different examples given out in a book. Job was one. There was also Hannah. Hannah from the Bible. She was the one who, she was the mother of Samuel.
Oh, okay, yeah.
She got to a point where her husband had 2 wives, and the other wife used to torment her because she had no children, whereas the other wife had like 10. She used to just torment her, mock her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The husband didn't understand. He was always posing questions like, well, why are you so down? Why don't you just love me? he couldn't put it together as to why she was hurting so bad, to the point that when she finally went to the temple and fell before the altar, begging God for a son, the priest there thought she was drunk and rebuked her, and she informed him, "I'm just in this much pain." Other examples you see are David. David's psalms express just the roller coaster of emotions that the man went through in his time as a follower of God, a man after God's own heart. Doesn't matter. Sometimes he didn't believe God was anywhere near him. Other times he was praising God for all that he is. The one thing you could say about David was that he was very open about his emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is that we live in this constant state of that, this flux. That's human, to be in a constant flux. We're in a weird, our church is weird. Our culture is weird because we're very, very stoic about emotions. We try not to let them be seen. We try not to be expressive of them. And it's really odd in church, because one of the most routine messages that I hear God giving for people is that is him literally asking them, come and be open with your emotions with me. Talk with me. Be open, honest with me, even if you hurt, even if you're mad at me. Talk. See, God's not afraid of our emotions.
I feel that when I speak.
He doesn't. And that's the thing, is like, we're afraid that we're going to upset him or hurt him or do something like that, or we're going to look bad in front of him. But doesn't that fear come from the fear of punishment? Like, we're going to be so mean that we're going to chase God away, or he's going to get so mad at us that he's going to punish us.
Fear of punishment. I struggle with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Condemnation.
In 1 John 4, it talks about God's love. And it says, perfect love casts out all fear. Because fear has to do with punishment. God's not interested in punishing us. He's interested in loving us. It's why he sent his son. It's why he poured out everything through him.
Could I add one more thing to that?
Sure.
How am I supposed to say this? Sorry. If God, I know God's not going to punish us, but never mind.
All right. We'll come back during a break or something. See, in all of this, we're still coming at this from our own perspectives and our own cultures and kind of the different various little elements of that. And see, for God, standing outside of that, he's not a part of the emotions that you're feeling. And even more than that, just to kind of go finish what the thought from earlier about the way that, when you start kind of flying off and getting into those fogs, if God gave you a word and said, I'm going to take you to this place, what we do not have a premise for is the time frame for when that's going to happen. Oftentimes a word is just a word. God says, God shows this person and sends them to you, and that person shares with you this vision that God's given them of you standing in amongst kings of men or leaders of nations and so on. And all these people that are just that are there. And that's the thing that we find ourselves kind of going through, is that the thing that we end up finding ourselves going through is that we're stuck in all these emotions. We don't see what anything to do with that. God sees the time frame, though. God's the one who can literally be standing back and watching you carry on down your road. And the whole way, he's just like, you're right there. You're almost there. All you need to do is carry on forward and you're going to be there. We don't see that though, because we're just blinded by the emotions. We don't have that direction. So you have that example of like, you know, being amongst those leaders of men. You could be a day away from that, but you have no idea. You could be years away from that, but you have no idea, and that's the point. Those words aren't given just to satisfy your feelings. Those words are given because those are true. Those are truths for us to hold on to and to hope in. To understand that no matter how bad things are right now, God has a future for you that's with him and through him, and that he sees it. He's looking at your future and saying, hey, you're going to go here, you're going to be here. That's going to be you. And I believe in that enough to have this person share that with you. And for us, when we're caught up in all those emotions and just the chaos of life, we don't see that. All we see is what's right in front of us and whatever's blinding us. And half the time that we're asking God for words or directions or whatever, it's really just to satisfy the chaos that we feel. It's about the emotions being satisfied. It's not about any truth. It's why we forget it so quickly. When God does show up and give you that word, oftentimes we'll hear it and be like, oh, I feel so much better now. And then, you know, even just an hour later, something hits you and suddenly you're back in that chaotic place. And you're right there again, asking God for another sign, another example, another person to come share that word with you. Like Gideon. Gideon's not even a good example, though.
Oh yeah, the fleece.
He used the fleece, but then once he had it, he was good to go. I know people who God could give them a fleece. God could show up himself, tell them in person, this is what you're going to do. A minute later, they'll be back to that place of just like, maybe that wasn't real. God, send me another sign if that was real. I've been that person so many times. And that's the point, is just that, you know, we struggle through this particular ground and we don't really know how to have hope in this place because we don't always have hope in God. We don't always have trust in God. Oftentimes we're willing to let our emotions just run us and rev us. And you know, the enemy's there all the time driving us in that direction. I posed that question at the beginning about, would you rather be dead or alive right now? Because that's the push that the enemy will often send us through. Back during the series on spiritual warfare, I was sharing about how one of the biggest things that the enemy taught me when I was following Satan, and that was to try to drive people to these points of killing themselves or wanting to die. Because once you're at that point, you don't have any hope in God left. You're willing to sacrifice your relationship in order to have whatever form of hope or whatever form of satisfaction you can get. So as a result of that, you're willing to make compromises and willing to do things that would never be acceptable. And that's that point. That's why they drive it so hard. It's very much so a work that's laid out there for us.
That's so cool. It's funny.
So, talking further about just this reality of where we sit. So, you know, first being faced with that question, and then also just these little realities about the way that we live, how so much of the way that we live is transactional, and how God doesn't escape that because it's how we reason and function. If I do things, then I'm supposed to get something back. On top of that, our whole concept of success is dependent on that particular aspect. See, the funny thing about it is, as being followers of Jesus or not, it doesn't matter. Most of us that have been raised in this country, our perspective is such that we look at our success as the thing that determines our value. See, if you're a pastor but nobody shows up to your church, then you're a failure. You're not a good pastor. Or if you're an evangelist and you're trying to bring people to church and you can never get anybody to come, you're a failure. It doesn't matter that 18 people didn't choose to come. They heard you. They said, "I don't want to be there." That's not on them. That's your fault. We take the blame for these kinds of things. We take responsibility for things that are outside of our control because we can't control people. But we don't live in that kind of world. We're very self-focused in a way. We take responsibility for things that are not our fault, that we can't control, and then we blame ourselves for that, and we diminish our own value in our own eyes. So it's this kind of thing where we're constantly kind of browbeating ourselves and telling ourselves why we don't matter, and then we use this thing as evidence. And it's funny because, like, you know, when you look at examples in the Bible, we look at these kinds of things as reasons why we should give up or move on to something else. Our lack of success, our wealth of failure. And I'm not talking about like deluding ourselves. I'm talking about when you have things where you're doing your best and you're giving everything that you are, and it's a passion of yours. It's something that you are, by all accounts, good at. But people don't want to do it. They don't want to follow. They don't want to go. When circumstances are beyond your control, or the economy flops, or something else goes wrong, those are the times when we can't take responsibility. That's what I'm referring to.
But yet, like, we're still trying to figure out our worth according to, like, how high or low our success is.
Correct.
Oh, man. I definitely think that hits home with me.
Yeah. And see, the thing of it is that we do this all the time. We dictate to ourselves, and it's not just us, but our friends, our family, people around us. A lot of our culture has the same kind of system for determining value. It's our bar for establishing if somebody means anything. If you're not successful, then, you know, you already have to deal with yourself, but then you have to deal with others saying, "Oh, yeah, okay." And they kind of move on. But it's funny because, like, when you read the scriptures, you see examples of, I think one of my favorites is always Jesus, where in John 6, it tells the story of him feeding, I think it was 5,000 people with just a couple loaves of, or a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread. It takes 12 baskets to deal with the leftovers from what he gave out to these people. You know, everybody stops at that part of the story.
12. That number. 12 disciples.
Nobody continues that chapter and reads the part where those people then followed Jesus after he hopped on a boat with the disciples and they went across a lake. Those same 5,000 odd people, they followed him to that place. And then in asking for more, Jesus explained the reality of who he was to them. And they all turned their backs on him and walked away. That was 5,000 people lost for the kingdom of God. By Jesus.
Crazy.
By our determination and our
That
perspective.
many people would convince me that something's wrong with me.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is like we live with all these ways of determining value that are based off of merit or success or different things. We have all these different bars. that we try to hold up to say, this is why I mean something. This is why I have value. And it's like we need that in a way. It's kind of like that little proof that we need in order to tell ourselves that we have meaning. But that's the thing, is that tonight isn't about, you know, questions of whether you would rather be alive or dead. It's not about the attacks that the enemy puts out there, the way he tries to push us into these holes where we can never come back out of. It's not even about the way that we live and the way that we're focused on. Either we're stuck in our chaos, or we're, you know, trying to determine our own success. This isn't about our tendency to make ourselves gods of ourselves and the world around us. The way that we sit ourselves in that seat of judgment in order to determine if we mean anything and if the people around us mean anything. And in all of that, perpetuate these same cycles because it's all we understand. No, tonight is about hope. And about where that comes from and why we should have it. And it's also about why we have value no matter what. And I've talked about this before, but I will beat this drum until God lets me stop. The thing of it is that we all have intrinsic value. It doesn't matter how successful you are or how much of a failure you are. If you're able to start a business and get it going just off of what you want to do, off of a thought or a passion, that's fantastic. If you can't do that, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Because it doesn't make you a good or bad person. There are plenty of successful people who are terrible, morally bankrupt, and they're the worst kind of individuals that you could ever meet. There are plenty of complete failures at life who are the best kind of people that you could meet. Morally rife with beautiful things, who have so much to offer the world. It's like they can just never get off the ground. But it doesn't matter because the system isn't developed for either side. The thing of it is that God doesn't focus on your worldly success or your worldly failure. He's not interested in that. That's our preoccupation. He's not interested in how, I shouldn't say it that way. He's not caught up in your emotional roller coasters. You're trapped on that thing and you're just going every which way, every turn and wheel and spin and everything like that. He's outside that. He sees where you're going. He sees where you are. He sees who you are in the middle of that. And in that, he sees somebody that he loves, that he loved enough to give up everything for. One of the biggest things that God kept showing me over the last couple of weeks here was about the way that we don't live in hope, the way that we struggle so much with this, because there are so many systems in place for how we think, how we reason, what we value, what matters to us, that are actually designed in order to rob us of hope. See, even what we were talking about at the beginning, the way that so much of the world, every time you get online, every time that you talk to your friends, your family, even just listening to random people in a coffee shop, you'll hear conversations where they speak about how wretched human beings are. But nobody acknowledges that we're also, how much beauty there is.
Yeah.
I always remember when I was going to Bridgetown, the pastor there, John Mark, he used to talk about people coming up to him and saying, you know, if there's a God, why would he allow such terrible things like starvation and disease and death and pain and suffering? And he would always respond to them with, well, okay, but then what about all the good things like beauty and joy and happiness and laughter and art and family and fellowship and all these different things, music and dancing. What about the bright side of everything? We don't take stock of any of this.
He was good. Vaccine.
The thing is that we
We'll have to go to.
we have this way of just being stuck in one direction and stuck in this system that says one thing. And it's all negative. It's all inherently designed to pin you down and hold you there under just the weight of shame and guilt and fear and doubt and pain. All the while it blinds you to the beauty of what's happening around you. Do you know how many people suffer depression and they're surrounded by friends? They feel completely and utterly alone all the time. But they have people around them who love them, who care about them, who would throw their lives out there for them again and again and again. But they can't value that. They can't even see it. They're so blind. It's just this thing of like where we need to start opening up our eyes and perceiving what's around us and even occasionally grabbing onto it instead of only seeing with what we feel. You'd be shocked how good life actually is for a lot of us. But we're caught up too much in what's not. There was a movie, actually, of all things. And what was it called? It was About Time, I think it was.
That's like one of my favorite movies I've seen in a long time.
Interstellar.
Right.
I don't know what part.
Interstellar?
So, no, it's About Time. Anyway, it's kind of like a rom-com, but there's a concept to it where the guy in the movie has the ability to go back in time. And
Is it a time machine, basically?
No.
Like,
it basically he just has the ability to like go back in time a certain to events in his life and like make different decisions.
Yeah, you can kind of change things.
butterfly effect?
Not
It's similar.
no, not quite like that. It was more like
But it's called About Time.
there were no negative connotations usually, unless he like royally screwed something up, and then he could just go back anyways. But the thing was that he, throughout the course of the movie, like he uses it to get the love of his life and all this other stuff. And at the end, like he loses his dad, and he keeps going back to visit his dad until finally it hits a point when he can't do it anymore. And as kind of like his last meeting with his dad kind of gives him, because his dad had the ability to do it too, gives him kind of his manifesto of how to go about, living the best life. And what he told the guy to do, his son, was to live every day without actually going back in time at all to fix anything. And then having lived out the whole day, at the end of the night before he goes to bed, go back to the beginning of that day and live it out again, knowing fully and completely how everything was going to turn out and how everything was going to be, and experiencing the freedom and the joy that comes from knowing that you're going to be okay at the end of it. Now, that might seem a
It's like
little
when you trust
obscure.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's that thing, is like a lot of us, we look to know that we're going to be okay before we actually believe in it. And the thing with hope is that's not really how that works. If I know the outcome of something before it happens because I've lived it before, obviously there's nothing to really hope for. But the thing of it is that we do know that God has that ability, so when he tells us something or directs us somewhere, we can hope in that. We can hope that he knows what he's doing, assuming that we trust him. But that is a whole other animal. But the biggest thing is that in looking at all of this and talking about all of this, there's a place for us to be released from just these systems that hold us down. All of these well, carefully laid out plans and plots and different things that are designed to maintain us, and even the separation from God that we live in. Because a lot of our mistrust even comes from that. We don't know him. How do you trust somebody that you don't know? If some random person walks up to you in the street and tells you your future, you're going to think that they're crazy. That's all. They just walk up and tell you, hey, your life's going to be okay. Who are you? You don't know that. But if it's a trusted friend who knows you inside and outside and very, very well, it maybe has a different effect. So, the thing of it is that, and God's open for all of that. You know, we talked not long ago about the Holy Spirit, and I am supposed to go and like read through John 16 again.
John what?
John 16.
John 16. I just finished John the other day.
It's already bookmarked. Jesus says, starting in verse 7, "But I tell you the truth, it is for your good that I am going away. Unless I go away, the counselor will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. When he comes, he will convict the world of guilt in regard to sin and righteousness and judgment. In regard to sin, because men do not believe in me. In regard to righteousness, because I am going to the Father, and where you can see me no longer. And in regard to judgment, because the prince of this world now stands condemned. I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear. But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth. He will not speak on his own, he will speak only what he hears, and he will tell you what is yet to come. He will bring glory to me by taking from what is mine and making it known to you. All that belongs to the Father is mine. That is why I said the Spirit will take from what is mine and make it known to you." Reading those passages and just having Jesus share what the Holy Spirit is and what it's supposed to be. A counselor is somebody who talks to you and gives you guidance and direction. He wouldn't use that term if it didn't mean what it's supposed to mean. This isn't supposed to be some kind of like minor thing. It is supposed to be something that's very much a part of our lives as followers of Jesus. In fact, when you go back and read the book of Acts, what you see time after time with every single one of the stories involved is that the Spirit falls. And then people are saved, whether it's Cornelius in his house with all of his family before Peter, whether it's Paul going out to create disciples all throughout, Greece. Even the day of Pentecost, the Spirit fell and people started speaking in tongues and all these crazy miracles started happening.
No, I just read that. That's funny.
The point in all of this is that the Holy Spirit was a key factor in the life of early Christians and being a Christian. We don't have that anymore. The Christian life now is about reading the Bible and going to your church services. It's not about living with God, it's about living for God. You do your good, and then good will happen to you, is what we tell ourselves.
That's karma.
Until it doesn't. I know it's karma, but tell me it's not in the church.
Because grace is what you don't deserve.
So it's called back to
So, and the thing of it is that we're meant to live a far more grandiose kind of life. And I don't mean that in terms of like what we typically think of with grandiose. This isn't about success and money or anything like that. It's about life. It's about living life to the fullest. It's about experiencing love and joy and fellowship is about experiencing things that really matter. And I say that specifically, things that matter, because these are the things that God values. He doesn't take us through all these seasons of pain and anguish just to torture us. He takes us through them to teach us something. You can go through, I've had seasons where I found myself feeling like I was completely alone and abandoned and hopeless. And when I opened my eyes, I was able to realize that I was surrounded by family and loved ones and people that really cared. And when I was willing to embrace that, rather than continuing to, go back to that old cycle of, well, this is why I'm unhappy, and instead grabbing onto these things that were worth having.
Grab onto what God's already given you.
Right. I was able to find a lot of joy and happiness and even meaning.
Thank you. That really does speak to me. Realizing what you already have.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, for all of us, there's hope to be found there. Tell me, like, and this isn't something that I'm looking for an actual answer for from anybody, it's just something to think about. But when you're happiest, when you're surrounded by friends and family, and mind you, this is rather like, this is the kind of thing. Friends and family is more of a term to describe the people who love you. That may not be your actual friends or your actual family, that may be a specific group or a different group or whatever.
They're the people in your
Semantics.
life.
My point is when you're surrounded by the people that love you, do you not find yourself actually enjoying your time and your circumstances? Do you not find yourself really being able to tap into joy? And maybe for a minute, that feeling of wanting to die subsides for a little bit. And you're able to just be, and maybe forget about those feelings of despair or loss or worthlessness or whatever for a moment. See, the thing is that, and I understand, like, there are people whose depression robs them of that. I get it. But I also know that a lot of those people are still very much so in that fog. I know that I was, until I was able to, like, look and pay attention. The thing is that in everything tonight, there's something for us to glean in terms of knowing who God is and even pushing further into that. If the Holy Spirit's supposed to be something that, a part of God that's with us, counseling us, then maybe it's something that we need to lay down and be open for. What I mean by that is, it doesn't matter if you hear God's voice or not. There's a place for us to ask Him to become part of our lives on a more routine basis. And I'll bet that when we ask Him for open ears and open eyes, we find that He's a lot more talkative than maybe we realized. Whether it's signs, it doesn't have to be a voice of God. Sometimes it's just a friend saying that one thing that specifically answers that question. Sometimes it's a billboard, sometimes it's the pastor speaking about something that's so dead on it's ridiculous. The point is that He has a lot of avenues by which to reach us, and He will use them.
Yeah.
If we're willing to see. So, even when it comes down to it, and He might not. Because the truth is that maybe you are so stuck in that transactional kind of mindset that He's tired of functioning like an ATM, and He wants you to just live. And He'll meet you at random in order to break you out of that. So you can know that He's there because He wants to be, not because of anything that you did. it's a relationship that, it's the relationship that God tries to cultivate with each of us. To know, for us to know that we are wanted, that we are loved, that we're fought for and cherished, and that we have value and meaning all the time. Whether we're at a high, at a low, we always have meaning and value, even when we're bad.
Mm.
Our being bad doesn't change the fact that he still loves us and wants the best for us. And there's a lot of freedom to be had in knowing all of that. There's a funny thing, because just the last thing before we close out is that in talking about that kind of like culture of shame, see, I've talked about this before, but there's this thing that happens when you're constantly telling people what's wrong with them. When you're constantly telling somebody that they're bad, they start to believe that they're bad. And when they start to believe that they're bad, they live like somebody that's bad. If you tell a kid all their lives that they're a criminal, they'll start acting like a criminal, because that's what they are. That's what everyone says it must be true.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those systems that's designed to hold us down and keep us believing in terrible things about ourselves, about the world. And there's a place for us to have open eyes and open ears. A place for us to see that actually we're not those things. This is why God comes with "You're loved. You mean everything. You mean everything. You're valued. You're a good person. You're a son. You're a daughter." He comes bringing those kinds of words because he's going to speak a truth to us that maybe the world doesn't see, because the world doesn't care to see our truth.
Mm.
God does, though. He made each of us. He takes great pride in his workmanship, in the people that he made. He takes pride in them and joy in them and loves them. And that's us. So that's what I got.
Yeah.
And then we'll go, we'll take a little break, and then we'll pray and
Good.
close out.
I have a lot to say. Just kidding.